Droplets of sweat beaded off his temples and smoothly traced the curve of his face. Heated blood pumped through his veins, his heavy heart cut somewhere mid-beat. The features on his face are saturated with pain, suffering, and defeat, and his eyes tell a story of the defined terrains of his childhood when it was once whole and complete. The raw undersides of his aching feet are blotted with fresh blisters as he silently waits for movement. From afar, a bomb explodes. Panic, the ground beneath rumbles with agony. Thrown down to his knees, the soldier clambers up again, now heading towards the enemy, running towards justice. Sprinting across the fields, his dedication, refusing to stop in search for a new beginning. Refusing to let this situation and unfairness define his life, he keeps his head held high as he fights for his blood, his homeland, Vietnam.
Upon the broken dawns of the 1950s, Vietnam was launched into war, a war that left its wounds and imprints in the hearts of soldiers and civilians. Though all fire and gunshot ceased on April 30th, 1975, the impact does not fade.
When the war ended, my mom stayed in Vietnam, and she didn't come to America until she was about 17. But she would tell me she remembered bombs coming down, and she would have to cover her face and hide under the tunnel. And her life growing up in Vietnam was really tough, since she was an Amerasian. She was half Caucasian. Her father was an American soldier. And her mom abandoned her because she didn't have enough money to raise her, so she was adopted with his family. And this family treated her really horrible. She was starved, she was beaten, she had no bed to sleep on, she had only 2 pairs of clothes, and she was alone.
Growing up as a kid, I remembered playing around a lot with a scar on my dad's hand. It was this rough, jagged hand scar. And it wasn't until later that I realized that the scar came from the Vietnam War. And at that point, when I realized it was from the Vietnam War, the scar sort of horrified me. I could never look at the scar again without seeing sort of the hardship in my dad's eyes, in his soul, how the war scarred him. So at that point, I came up with a personal goal to help him erase that scar from his body by sort of being successful, by reminding him that he got that scar not in vain, that it gave him sort of a person he should be proud of, me. So now I live a life where I live my own life, but I also want to live a life that my dad is proud of, so that it washes away and erases that scar, so they don't have to remember about it. And every time he looks at the scar, he sees me, and not the war.
One of the biggest effects of the war is separation, and my dad's family is no exception to that. My grandpa, after he came out of the re-educational camp, he decided to be in with 4 of my dad's other siblings, and for 30 years the rest of the family has been trying to immigrate over to the United States. And finally in 2001, my dad, my mom, and I was able to reunite with everyone here in America. In a way, I'm appreciative of the 9 years I lived in Vietnam and the 10 years growing up here in America. because not only do I gain the first-hand perspective of the country recovering from years of war, but I also gain the language and the culture that many of my cousins lack.
Like materially, then Vietnam's surely is like have less material and less like means to achieve your goal. So when I came to the United States, and there's the whole new change I have to adapt to, and back in Vietnam, I wasn't really clear much about the actual Vietnam War, because like I only got like the government imposed education style, I guess. And when I come here, and then I'm exposed with different viewpoint. So I mean, yeah. So it's better. I mean, like to be more informed about the Vietnam War.
So my grandpa was an officer for the U.S. Army, but then we lived a really good life back then. But after the war, the communists just took away everything from us. But luckily, the U.S. sponsored him to America, and now it's have given me a chance to live a better life and access to a higher education. And I think the war, even though it's affected our family and the Vietnamese community, but I think it's giving our generation, the Asian American living here right now, a chance to better understanding about where we came from, how our family has what our family has done to us, and I think from there we just try to grow from it and pay back and appreciate more about our culture.
Sài Gòn ơi, ta mất người như người đã mất tên, như dòng sông nước cuồn quanh buồn, như người đi cách mặt xa lòng, ta nhủ thầm em có nhớ không?
And you know, my mom came from a pretty wealthy family back in Vietnam, and when she came here, she was left with nothing, you know. And my dad wasn't as wealthy, but he came here and he had nothing. And you know, they tried their hardest to raise myself and my sister. My dad worked a lot, my mom worked a lot, and something that they always made really important to me while I was growing up was that I always had to be good at school, you know. I would have to you know, try my hardest to get good grades, attain the highest level of education I could, so that I could take care of them ultimately, you know, and also make a better life for myself and for my kids, you know, their grandchildren. I feel blessed to be here today because my parents kind of pushed the value of education, trying to make it clear to me that education was really important, you know.
So the war affected my parents indirectly with its aftermath. My parents actually escaped by boat as refugees, and when they got there here, they had to find a way to pay for their education. My father had to work as a janitor, and my mother had to work at 7-Eleven, the donut shop, library, anything you named it, to get her through schooling. And just to hear that, it makes me appreciate and be more grateful for the education I have today, and to have their support and not go through that struggle. But I'm sure that many other refugee experience today, they're still struggling to find their ground.
Despite having ended nearly one generation ago, the Vietnam War continues to influence the Vietnamese and Southeast Asian community through emotional and haunting memories of the war.
Fueled by these emotions and their personal experience, it is usually the general, often silent, consensus of the older generation of Vietnamese parents to cope with the past by looking towards the future, specifically the future of the younger generations. Having progressed beyond the war, the older generations rely on the war as the platform and source of their motivation to encourage younger generations to succeed. And as the war becomes a crucible for personal change and growth for the younger generations, the origin of remembrance of the war has slowly faded for these younger generations.
Therefore, as we, the younger generations, stumble into the future, we must not forget the personal stories of the war and of our parents. Through their eyes and through their stories, we will remember the war, remember April 30th, remember our parents' struggle, our community struggle. But as the older generations have done, we must advance. We must take advantage of the opportunities given to us by the war and use it as the foundation for our growth and development as a new generation of Vietnamese American.